Hi, Julianne. I just wanted
Yeah,
I wanted to thank you for taking some moments to talk with me about Ray Castellino.
certainly. I'm glad to.
Mm. Why don't you just tell who you are, so people can know?
Okay. I'm Julianne. I'm Ray's sister, only sister. I was 4 years younger than him, and he's my brother.
Yeah, well, we are we're honoring him with series of awards and also this Life and Works um this Life and Works interview. So we're wanting to gather information about Ray, as we have done a lot of pioneers in the pre and perinatal world.
Mhm.
And so one of the very first questions that we have is like, what was going on in the world when Ray was conceived, and what was going on in the world of the parents of Ray? So I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
A lot was going on. So Ray was born July 11th, 1944, and World War II didn't end until 1945 in May. So he was born during the war and conceived during the war. And our parents were young, relatively young. I think, 19, my mom, 22. And my mother described the attack of Pearl Harbor as the worst day of her life in 1941. So it kind of always told me how serious the time was and the peril that they perhaps experienced. Mhm. They were, our father was from Italy. He came over when he was a year old. And my mother was, first generation Italian American. Both of Ray and I grew up in a home that was bilingual, very prevalent Italian American home, extended family, and very family centered home experience.
Oh, well, I just, the questions around that time, like what would you say the main values of your family were at that time?
Well, I came, 4 years later, but I think the values prevailed. They would have been family, um, being together, um, certainly finding their place in the world as people with a different culture and making their way in the world, which they did. They provided for us and created a world without challenges, but with a lot of enrichment also. Um, it's hard quite to answer that question.
Oh, I thought you did a wonderful job.
Okay.
I can see um Ray. I can see his values and the roots of them in what you say. So it's wonderful to hear you speak it. Yeah.
Yeah, there are many things like Ray's love of music, and I can tell you more detail as we go along in the questions about specific experiences that I had with him that I think clearly showed his compassion, his
Mm.
um, insight into humans, and his incredible, I wouldn't call it necessarily a need, but intrinsic way that he connected um, before any directives in his work in the perinatal and prenatal work. And I can tell you some about his early, careers and how that I think shaped where he was going in his life as we go on. But
Well, yeah, well then, really what we'd like to know a little bit more about is your family, like what,
okay, the family.
the qualities of your mother and your father and the
Mhm.
environment. you know, of, the things that you feel like in your family fed his sole purpose.
Mhm. Well, um, I'll just describe my mother a little bit. I think she was a somewhat nervous person and perhaps unidentified. She struggled with anxiety, I think, but she was very much about the home. And we had a traditional mother, father at home, very engaged in our parenting. And she was a homemaker and she was a nurturer.
Mm.
And she loved to cook and take care of her family. And I think that was her primary directive that I could see. And our father had a traditional role of a provider and a businessman. And
What kind of business did he do?
um, he became and had what we call the salami factory. So his sausage manufacturing, and interestingly, both Ray and I became quite plant-based, vegetarian vegans. Probably shaped a lot in part. I think Ray, who worked in that factory, um, and so he was an entrepreneur, and he started in the basement of a house and then had a company built, and it was the second largest salami factory sausage company in the United States.
Wow, that's big.
It was very hardworking. He would leave at 5 in the morning and come back at like 5 in the evening and, be with us. And
Mm,
we would always have dinners together and
mm.
very, I think, traditional in terms of family kind of values. But there's turmoil also in the undertones of the family.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, did your parents stay together? I can't remember the full story.
Yes, hmm.
Mm,
They stayed together. Our mother died when she was 58, and we were all there in a beautiful hospice experience for her and a very conscious death. And I think Ray's death and the people who surrounded him, and I was not able to be there, reminds me of the love and support, very similar kind of thing. Um, so I'm not sure I'm remembering your question.
No, it was just did your parents stay together? And your
Mhm.
mom passed when she was young, it sounds like.
Yes, uh-huh. And
Mhm.
they were together, though I think they were thinking of separating some tumultuous time. But they had been married since they were very young.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
mhm.
Yeah. Well, what significant story or stories can you say about Ray's childhood and how it might relate to who he became?
Hmm. Well, truthfully, I would never have thought Ray was going to become somebody who was internationally regarded and someone who I think is loved the world over. Um, as a boy, he struggled with learning, and he actually did better being the person who was the AV audio equipment visual person. He did he did love gadgets later in his life.
He did.
And so he early on embraced technology. I think our family had learning disabilities in our genetics, and I think that impacted Ray maybe in terms of compassion, perhaps seeing life differently. But he just had a kind of plucky, happy go lucky Ray.
Mm.
Like, even as a kid, he had a certain kind of come what may kind of attitude about life. And so I don't know quite how that came to be to him or through him. And his healing directive, okay, he started as a music teacher,
Mm.
and he quickly, within a few years, it was not it just did not seem that a match, even though he was a music major. And then he went into polarity therapy and was very influenced by the work of Dr. Stone, who started polarity therapy. And then he became a chiropractor. Um, and all along he was incorporating. He preferred to be an innovator, which I think is a characteristic that I saw in my father also, somebody who would be very willing to look at things differently,
Mm.
even though we came from a very culturally a bilingual home. We were assimilating into America. We grew up in a home where there was a lot of cultural diversity, also some prejudices that would not be uncommon in the time. So I think Ray, but I can share two experiences when I was 8, because I looked the date up. Our parents, for whatever reason, decided on some holiday that Ray and I would go to the theater to see Around the World in 80 Days, just he and I. And that was a big deal. And that would have been in 1956. So Ray would have been 12 or 11, and I was 8. And I remember that at the intermission, everybody's leaving their seats, and we're in this Art Deco theater,
Mm.
and all the crowds are going up the aisles to the bathrooms and refreshments or whatever. And there was an older woman, and she was paralyzed in space, just standing there, not knowing what to do. And people were just streaming by her. And I was beside Ray, and he looked at me, he said, "Stay here." So he was my older brother, and I complied. And then I watched him go up to the woman who's paralyzed, who then I realized had her underwear wrapped around her ankles.
Oh,
And we were maybe 20 feet from the bathrooms, and without a thought, he hooked his arm into hers and guided her to the bathroom. He is only 12 years old.
oh, very kind.
I think exceptional,
Yeah.
what I consider uncommon kindness,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
that he intuitively knew to just, and she was waddling because of her underwear. And I suspect she had some cognitive decline, is my
Mm.
guess,
Mm.
based on her actions. But I don't
Mm.
know too many 12-year-olds who instinctively know how to handle that situation.
Oh, what a wonderful story.
Hmm. He would demonstrate other ways that, like we were again, our mother dropped us off at a pancake breakfast with a long trail of people, and the woman next to us, also an older woman, was sharing about. This is kind of a small story, but she was sharing how the parsley she'd eaten was, she was hoping it was covering the garlic that she'd eaten, and would it work? And Ray immediately engaged with her, and they discussed this at length. And I'm like watching, I mean, like going, okay. And it was like he just seemed to connect on whatever level people were at. And
Mhm.
again, we were probably about the same age.
Yeah. He easily connects with others.
I think that would be an attribute, and something he sought, I think, in his work, I think, was very self-rewarding.
Yeah.
Very, mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
He was an innovator and he listened and followed. He created something really important in our pre and perinatal profession.
Mm.
So yeah, I really deeply appreciate your brother. I think he really changed the world of how we practiced at that time. He's developed ways to have us access, early memories with a lot more gentleness and kindness. So the
Mhm.
things that you described, like one of our questions is, what are the initial traits that guided him in the direction in which he later, practiced in his life? And it's the kindness and connection. And I'm wondering, are there any other stories you'd like to tell?
I don't know if this directly relates, but our love of nature and which in all our family, which was nurtured because we spent a lot of time camping and being in the Sierras. And I think that connection reflects in Ray's work in that, how can I say this? A comfort with silence, the what is, the the greater. And of course, his spiritual directive um, was early on in his life also. I don't think I was fully aware of it, but he is the most influential person in my life.
Oh, that's very touching.
Mhm.
Um,
I could almost say one of, but I would have to say truly the most. And I, we all learned from Ray because he was always loving the edge of things, and pushing that boundary within a family of traditional values. This might be somewhat humorous. I forgot about this memory. So he was doing Gestalt work at Esalen and with Fritz Perl. And Ray decided that he was going to do a session with our family. And he assembled us in his Berkeley home with our traditional Italian father, mother, and the rest of us, and proceeded to conduct a session, which I was like, oh, I mean, I didn't know much about. I was later to learn about these things. So again, put the envelope and the idea that whatever goodness that he was learning, everyone else should learn about it too. And I think his love to communicate and teach. He was a teacher, and when I would ask him, "What is your essential you, Ray?" and he said, "I am a teacher," and that, and I don't know if people quite know that about him. His love to share information and see people grow. Certainly, he profoundly touch people in ways that I will never fully understand. But when I was around him, I would always see that. And being shyer and more reserved, perhaps than Ray, Ray had a very outgoing personality. I was just easy for me to be his sister. And all I would have to say is, I'm Ray Castellino's sister. And that was the end of the explanation because he was Ray. He was,
yeah,
he was a personality that many people were connected with quickly.
yeah.
He also was comfortable being in the limelight. He was the star of the musicals in high school, the lead vocal, and
Hmm.
I think that's part of Ray, um,
Yeah,
being
yes.
comfortable being out there and sharing his information, whatever. There always seemed to be a new edge, a new something that he was integrating, and also a spontaneity that he preferred to be spontaneous rather than schooled and structured when he
Right.
taught. He told me about that because I was also a teacher, not in the schools, but well at university level, and we would sometimes talk about teaching, and so that spontaneous, creative, innovative, connected person. One of my favorite things about Ray in terms of this segue is music. So I was reviewing some notes he wrote about our family when we were trying to investigate some curious family background things that kind of had mystified all of us. And he wrote in the note that I found, he said, "I didn't get to sing yet today." And
Mm.
he sang.
Yeah.
Singing was like, and he made note, "I didn't get to sing today." That is classic Ray, and he had a trumpet, and we grew up and we all got to pick a musical instrument, and he would just like Silent Night, he would be out in the backyard singing to the angels. I'm not sure. He was forever kind of in that moment of kind of creative reverie when you were with him. Like, he would come to visit me when I lived on the Oregon coast, and he would bring 6 flutes, and I have sound sensitivities. And so I would sometimes struggle with Ray playing all these flutes, and so we would kind of negotiate, how he can meet his musical needs where I can have more quiet. So I I think I was probably one of the most blessed people on the planet to have Ray as my brother.
Thank you for agreeing to come and talk with me today, Robert. And I'm wondering if you could just introduce yourself a little bit. Just you're Robert, you're the younger brother of Ray, so just introduce yourself a little for the
Yeah,
listeners. Yeah.
thank you. I'm Robert Castellino. I'm Ray Castellino's younger brother. I'm about 10 and a half years younger than Ray. So he was quite a bit older. And in our family dynamic, that played out significantly and interestingly through our lives' younger years and then later years. And yes, I'm a professional home renovator and also a registered and practicing cranial sacral therapist.
Yeah, and you took the trainings with Ray, some of the things that he was doing, did you not?
Yeah, I trained with Ray through pre and perinatal work, as well as womb surround work. Although he didn't lead the womb surround, I stayed at his home during the womb surround, and there was quite a bit of discussion each evening after getting back from the womb surround.
Yeah, well, you are
It
able
was
to listen.
on womb surround on steroids.
Well, yeah, you were close to him, and I know that you know a lot about him, so I'm really grateful that you can give us a little bit more information about his
Oh
life.
yeah, Ray was a huge influence in life and uh, just always there for me as a child and as an infant even. I mean, so much so that he took me to his 5th grade class and carried me down the aisle of his classroom, introducing me to everybody in the room. Of course, Ray remembers this and remembered it distinctly. I had no recollection.
I could see him doing that. I
Right?
could see him doing that. Yeah. Well, let's see. Let's just go through some of these questions that will be great for you to answer for this project, and that's a little bit more about what was happening around the time of his conception. What were the values and challenges and opportunities that were around his conception and pregnancy that you know of.
Oh, well, mom and dad were passionately in love, I suspect. They had met at a dance in Berkeley a few years before. It was a time that was a tremendous tumult in the world. It was at the height of the Second World War. Um, Dad was going through a tremendous amount of personal upheaval, trying to gain his own citizenship to become a U.S. citizen, which was phenomenal unto itself because he lobbied a congressman in California who wrote Roosevelt, who granted him the opportunity to gain his citizenship, which he did, and then got himself drafted into the Army's Navy. And then mom was a homemaker. Both of them were chain smokers, amazingly enough. And they were part of a really tight Italian family community. They lived in the backyard or back in a home, a rental property behind my grandmother's home in Berkeley, California on Francisco Street. And it was more of a single family dwelling, kind of a cabin, so to speak, right on the edge of a playground to a elementary school. And, you know, there were so many things. Right then, my dad's sister was having a child who became super close to Ray, and Ray was very close to Don Grady, and So everybody, it was very super tight knit. So there's some real positives about coming into the world for him, but at the same time, the personal dynamics were a bit challenging. And, you know, I don't always think, and Ray would always reflect that the dynamics between mom and dad and problem solving and communications weren't necessarily up to his standards today.
Yeah. Well, that was a long time ago. I mean, what year was he conceived?
I think it's 1941, 42. He was a July baby. So
Mhm.
he 41. I think he was born in 42 or 44. So the year before, right in that era. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And out there on the west coast of the United States, um, where there was, I know the Pearl Harbor was there, in that part of the world, right? I don't
Oh,
remember.
they were hugely affected by curfew. You know, the lights would be turned down at night when it became dark. So they were afraid of an invasion by air, which of course the Japanese did in Pearl Harbor. But, you know, there was so many dynamics in segregation. The Japanese were being cordoned off to camps and so forth. And, you know, our family was pretty open and pretty close to a wide range of different cultures. And so I would suspect that being a first generation Italian was a huge influence on what was happening and the dynamics of the world. I mean, and they had just come through the backside of the Great Depression. So there was some real constraints in their thinking, almost we would consider a poverty mentality. So they were very frugal people, and
Mm.
they and on the other hand, most of their food was grown in the backyard.
Yeah.
They were great gardeners. So and they
Wow.
they were they were close to the land, and you know, Dad was a huge fisherman, and so they were always active and outdoors and engaged for sure.
Nice. Nice. Well, what are the best qualities of your parents and the environment in which you all grew up or he grew up mostly before you that added to his, the way he developed and what he developed, all of his work with pre-perinatal and um yeah, he was a pioneer, truly integrating so many things. So what kind of qualities from your parents and the environment can be observed to have it contributed?
Well, you know, it's interesting that it's couched in what were the positives. Um,
Well, the
I think
best qualities, or
best
maybe
qualities.
not.
Yeah, I think the best qualities were that, you know, there was a lot of care for these firstborns, you know, like they were so important and they were held up, especially the pride of his grandparents, you know, Rose and Joe and uh, step granddad Barney. They were very close knit. Same thing with Eugenia and Frank on my mom's side. They were very close knit, and he was well cared for, and they were proud. And there was a tremendous amount of sharing. I mean, and a lot of this comes from my experience just from viewing videotape and seeing photographs of Ray and Ray's commentary, not videotape, but 8 millimeter movies, Ray's commentary about what was going on that was positive as far as them being there, going to the park, being on Sundays, having picnics and being outside. And just you could see him growing as a toddler. And then my cousin being right there with him at the same time. The two of them cared about each other. They were so tight knit from the get go. I mean, from being infants on through their whole lives. That was a huge important thing. I think on the flip side, a huge influence in his younger years was the difficulty between mom and dad in their communication style, their arguing and fighting, and maybe some of the separation anxiety that Ray experienced, in particularly when dad went off to war, mom was left alone, mom's resentment towards dad, and dad coming back and it uh, being a difficult time for them as dad wanting to move back to Japan. My dad was actually stationed in Japan, working for MacArthur, monitoring all the movement of people and materials in and out of the country after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Dad fell in love with the Japanese people, and Mom didn't want to move. So there was a big conflict between them.
Mhm.
And a lot of that affected Ray's attachment style, and in feeling, and I sense the challenges he faced growing up, and maybe later in life, not feeling whole and feeling torn and looking for answers and striving to learn how to experience comfort. I think that discomfort that he experienced in his child rearing really was a big indicator as to how he was influenced in his work later on.
Hmm. That's interesting. Okay, thank you. Well, is there a story that can illustrate sort of something from your childhood that can illustrate who Ray became, like something formative, something that happened, that maybe a few stories, if you have any, that you feel like are connected to who Ray became and the things that he did for our field of practice?
Yeah, Ray was a super sensitive individual, and from what I understand, he was not only a protector for me, but he was one for my sister as well. So, an example would be, and this is mostly what I've learned from the two of them, that they may have done something wrong, and there was some need for correction, and they were sitting together on the back step of our home in Lafayette, California, and I'm not sure whether it was mom or dad, but I'm pretty sure it was mom. Um, had a tendency to slap as far as discipline was concerned, and she went to swing, and my uh, sister ducked, and my brother caught it on the cheek. And I think that he always rose up out of these situations where he felt mistreated, but instead of striking back, he found a way to navigate in healthier ways, to parent differently. And later in life, when he had his own son, he lived across the street from the house he grew up in and we grew up in. And he had gone through a divorce, and he was a single dad. And Ray wasn't necessarily all put together during that moment, but he was a dad that cared and stuck through everything and was looking for answers. And he was breaking out from being a music teacher in his early formative years to doing work in healing. And gosh, he organized Gestalt therapy sessions. And this was the time when he was a young father. And, he always looked out for his son's best interests. And as much as Sean was a challenge for Ray, Ray was an exceptional dad, and finding ways to communicate and deal with his own personal material through becoming a healthy parent.
Yeah, he told lots of stories like that, and he talked a lot about the challenges that he had parenting and how hard he worked and how much he wanted things to be different for parents and to how to learn how to be a healthy parent. I remember him telling me stories of
Yeah,
how.
one of the most significant contrasting pieces is Ray was a teenager, and he was quick to fire, and he and dad had an argument in the hallway of our family home. And this was a ranch home, and the hallway went from the living room down to the bedrooms. And dad hauled up and hit Ray with a fist. And Ray would say he was knocked head over tea kettle
Mhm.
down the hallway. And, you know, Ray never struck anybody. And he took that, that blow and, you know, made a commitment and made a promise to himself never to strike his own child or and 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 hold forgiveness. And the amazing thing about that story is the contrast of the relationship Ray had with his dad, Sam, in his midlife. I mean, Ray would come back home and dad and Ray would spend hours on the back porch in the evenings just talking. And their relationship became super tight and beautiful. And it was out of Ray's compassion and forgiveness, I believe, that he bridged the gap of the challenge he faced as a teenager to see the value of the love he had with his dad. And that, I'm sure, is and was expressed fully in his work and something that he shared intuitively.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Robert. That's very touching. So I would say that the next question is similar. I mean, you're just talking about the initial traits that guided him in the direction that his life went. And it sounded like he made some decisions early on in his life to be a much different type of parent than his parents, and committed to forgiveness and connection. And what else would you say, Robert?
Well, I think other influences include our family love of nature and camping trips with the other Italian families in the high Sierras. And that familial bond. I mean, I think it was, you know, it may be inherent, it may be epigenetic, but it was a part of the culture. And the openness of sharing that was a part of those experiences were a positive imprint that he carried into the future. In his pursuit of understanding the blueprint of his own wholeness was the expression of doing his own work. And the importance of creating the training that he's renowned for was not just for those and to change the course of how trauma was dealt with regarding whether it was birth trauma or physical or emotional or epigenetic, whatever the imprints were, was to deal with his own inability to regulate and to stay in the present. I mean, he struggled mightily with learning and challenges. As brilliant as he was, those things were huge influences as to how he worked to create trainings. It was the work that he was doing with everyone was work that he needed to do as a practice to maintain his sense of being and his sense of comfort in his own soul. And that reflection is so important because it's such a marker for so many of us he touched, I believe. You know, I can't be certain, but I think so.
Oh, yes, I believe so. I mean, we talk about it actually as his students, and we all benefited from what he created to help himself.
Right.
It became a part of the training, and actually the tools are excellent for self and co-regulation. And we know that Ray developed these things because he needed them. Not that he was thinking, oh, other people wouldn't benefit, but he did it so that he could more highly function in the world and in his job as a teacher. And yeah, it was wonderful. I think one of the stories I remember talking with you about too is Ray had had a great love for and capacity to be seen. I mean, he he had an amazing capacity to, it's like not everybody likes that or feels comfortable in that role, and he really was fine with it. And
Sure, I can elaborate on that if you'd like a bit. I mean,
sure.
it started. It's part of it's in the family with being entertainers, but he had a tremendous voice, and he was a tremendous vocalist. You know, he sang in operatic plays as well as he sang opera, and you know, Ray loved to perform and be in front of people. And the world was his stage so much that he might walk into the Sistine Chapel and break into song based on inspiration in the moment. Whoever was there was going to enjoy the performance, I'm certain. Um, but you know, Ray was tremendously gregarious, and but you know, that was, you know, for those of us who felt maybe embarrassed, like for me when I was younger, it became something that was really welcome. And because he was so able and so comfortable in front of people to settle a room. And I think this comes into really the deeper work where not only was he working on himself, but he was resonating with the vibration of people's discomfort so much that they would find a way to settle in his presence, you know, and he would slow things down so that everybody in the room had a place and a voice and standing in equanimity and equality, regardless of their challenge. And he welcomed all voices, and you know, his presence in front of people, whether it was a part of his passion for being a performer or not, and later in his work was just soothing. And I think the sense of baby soothing was maybe the greatest gift that he gave all of us, is how do babies soothe, and how do they self-soothe, and how do we self-soothe as adults. And he was tremendous at a tremendous example at being able to hold not the stage but hold presence with a group of people and uh, help people rise and to feel loved.
Yeah. Wow. That's a wonderful statement, Robert. Yeah. Feel like taking a pause.
Pause, pause, pause.
Pause. Because yeah, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Yeah, he was amazing. You
yeah,
know,
he was.
it,
He
he.
was.
I was saying to somebody the other day, you know, because the last 3 weeks I sat in for a physical therapist and cranial sacral therapist. She's 2 in 1 here in Boulder, and handled her client load. And it dealt with so many of the challenges that I learned about through my own training, through cranial sacral embryology, pre and perinatal work, and you know, the womb surround. But it was just like, you know, it's like Ray was an influence of every moment of every one of those sessions, and the creativity that he inspired to find ways to be patient and wait and to listen to people, and the subtlest of cues that would open the door for an opportunity to find a way to navigate a challenge, to find some comfort. I don't like to use the word heal because, you know, it's always a practice. You're always on the way there. But it was like Ray's voice, and I think it's maybe true for many, Ray's voice, it was there informing me these last 3 weeks, but has always been there and still is informing me how to move forward and to be. And gosh dang, what a gift, you know, and what a privilege. And thank God I got it before the end of my life, and thank God for Ray and
Yeah.
his guidance.
No, well, thank you, Robert. Thank you. I think that really is a good place for us to complete our interview. And the only other question here that I feel like maybe you've already answered is from your experience with him as his brother and being in his family, was there anything from his early years that you would say, any person or non-human that inspired him to create the work that he did?
oh, who is the, you know, who is the father of cranial sacral that he trained under?
William
William,
Sutherland or
William Emerson,
William Emerson? No, William was one of his the
cohorts. Oh, he one of his. No, who is the guy who led him that he trained under in the Bay Area? That
Randolph
he's
Stone.
pardon me,
Randolph Stone.
Randolph Stone, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Stone's influence in his transition from um, being a music teacher into becoming a chiropractor was the in his work with polarity therapy were really foundational pieces to his work later in life. I mean, Stone really was informative, and
Yeah.
only with them, but Emerson and as well as the Chitties, they
Yeah.
all point to him. And I think that if there is a human, that would be the one. Now,
Right.
any extraterrestrial beings, I have no clue, but I'm pretty dang certain Stone was right there with them because the stories always came back to their experiences um, and how it informed them to pursue their own work. And I also believe there is one thing. Ray was a tremendous meditator and went to India 3 weeks a year.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of time uh, with a greater sense of divinity beside himself, looking for cues and answers and guidance himself. And I'm certain that he felt inner motivation through those hours of deep contemplation that really guided him to um, make this huge commitment and dedication. It was phenomenal. I mean, it was single minded so much that in the last 6 months of his life, he was thinking, oh, I've got another level of training we need to develop that we need to take. So certification takes people to this whole new level of understanding so they get it, so it can be cemented for future generations for time and eternity. I mean, those are his words. I mean, and then when we came to those, excuse me, for these last few months of his life, he was always talking about the work. He was always thinking about making sure that there was the continuance and that it wasn't just him. It was something that could be replicated, something that could be expanded. And his work around the world was a testament to that vision.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories and yourself with us. And this is going to be a part of a longer series of interviews, little interviews I'm doing to fill in for all the things that Ray was and that he did with his life. So thank you for sharing today. My name is Kate White, and it's really wonderful to be able to do this interview about Ray. I'm here with Sandra Castellino, who was formerly married with Ray, and then spent many years, decades of her life with Ray, and is the parent, the other parent to his daughter, Sasha. And I have Mary Jackson, who has been partnering with Ray for many years and was a student and then became partner and co-teacher and worked together in different venues, both teaching and working together with families. And I also have Tara Blasco, who also partnered with Ray and is both of these women, Mary and Tara Blasco, are legacy teachers for the Castellino group. And Sandra still holds the helm, runs things as one of the leaders in the Castellino group. So I'm just going to ask a few questions about Ray's life. Is there anything the three of you want to say by way of introduction, or have I done enough for you?
Yeah, I think you did fine.
Okay, good. Well, just also to name that Tara and Mary work at the Building and Enhancing Bonding and Attachment Clinic. I can't remember your designations there, but I know the both of you have helped in that clinic and run the clinic. One is president and one is director. I think Mary, you're president, right?
Right.
Or you are director, and have worked side by side with Ray for many, many years. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. And so just to start with, who are the main people you feel, or even non-humans, that really sparked the life of Ray, the work that he did? So who were the main, or what were the main instigators or inspirations for the work of Ray Castellino?
Okay, well, I'll start with that. Ray, the first thing he did I'd say the second thing actually he did in the world of health was discovered polarity therapy. In fact, I met him at a class with Dr. Stone in the early 70s. And we both discovered polarity therapy, and we were in on the ground floor of the swell that happened. So, and polarity therapy takes an understanding of Western approaches to body work as well as Eastern understanding of the chakras, the 5 elements, etc. And we became polarity therapists. And that was a huge thing. I mean, that's what we were doing for a living when we got married. And in addition to that, he had previously been in music, and he was very interested in teams and pulling things together and how group dynamics worked. And he had been the lead singer in all the high school musicals and pulled these, was part of the team of pulling together a show. So he liked being on the stage, and he liked entertaining, and he liked being in that field of the group where everybody's attention was on one thing and they were trying to do something together. So he also, he was very interested in being a pioneer, no matter what it was. Any group he got involved with, he was on the board. He was an officer. He was the first vice president of the Polarity Therapy Association and the second president. And there were many, many others that he did, including the one that became Massage and Bodywork group. Mm-hmm. He was one of the people. He represented polarity therapy. And so he had all these themes. Also, he was a minister. He actually worked with couples, counseling them before they were married. So he had a lot of experience with working with people with deep issues. He didn't like to be on the surface. He wanted to be going as deep as possible. So then he became a chiropractor, because that was how you learned in those days cranial work. Dr. Stone was a craniosacral therapist, but nobody taught it except in chiropractic or osteopathic school. There was no Franklin Sills, there was no Upledger. He studied, and not every chiropractor studies sacral occipital work, but that's what he focused on. It's called SOT. And so it was a natural thing when Franklin decided to come to the United States that Ray was the first assistant. Mm-hmm. He brought Claire Dolby, but Ray was the U.S. assistant for that first training. Mm-hmm. And then he kept seeing babies on his chiropractic table go into these motions that reminded him of birth. And when he found out that somebody actually thought that meant something and was speaking at APA, which was William Emerson, mm-hmm. he was very excited and went to his first APA conference. And it was like he came home and this was like what he was going to do with the rest of his life. So, and he also got some sessions where he began to explore his own early life and all the challenges for that. And he started to, everything was about birth. I kept thinking, oh my God, Ray, it's not all about birth. But I was the one that needed to get educated. And over time, he changed from being a chiropractor to doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
First, we had to get rid of his table. His patients were rolling over onto the floor. And so we got rid of the chiropractic table, and then soon we got rid of the chiropractic license, and he dedicated the rest of his life to working with babies and adults. And then because there was a groundswell of requests, developing a training program.
And he partnered with Anna Chitty some too.
Anna took that first cranial training that Franklin did, and Anna spent a lot of time with Ray, who was the assistant, making sure she learned it really, really well. So they went rollerblading together.
Yes.
So we have known Anna since the early, that would be the early 80s. And they both came from polarity therapy.
Yes.
So he got into this whole thing with birth and all the training he does. And then he came around full circle. The last thing that was new that he did was the body into being that he did with Anna.
Yes.
And they were doing such similar things that I said, why don't you two teach together? And that's how body into being came along. I administered that.
Yeah.
So, and I also took one of the classes.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, those are all of the people I remembered from all the stories about Ray, about how he grew, through Randolph Stone into the working with Franklin Sills to Anna Chitty and William Emerson, and how their colleagueship really helped shape and form some of the things that he taught, as well as his relationships with you, Mary and Tara, both of you, I'm sure. I don't know if you want to add anything more.
Well, can I say a couple more things?
Sure.
So Ray studied with William, and then pretty soon William asked Ray to teach with him because Ray had the bodywork piece. But Ray decided that he wanted to do a different format, which was more focused with one turn at a time. And that's how he developed the womb surround. And then he tried teaching little bits and pieces because people were asking. And then he decided, no, I want a group that I can just take through everything I want to offer them. But he and William were colleagues and had incredible respect for each other right up until he died. William he was in contact with William those last few months. And then because he was doing all this, he decided he needed to start working with babies. And that's how Beba came about. And Wendy McCarty she co-facilitated. She was already an MFT, and she did all the administrative work. And first they worked in Woodland Hills, and then they came up here, and they got to do both. So he was doing both womb surrounds and Beba. And then Wendy decided what she really wanted to do was to go and teach and write, and she's brilliant at those.
Yes.
So she went to SBGI that Marty Glenn started, and then Ray also taught there, but his main focus was these womb surrounds and the foundation training. This started in When did they start? In the early 80s.
And now you're on what what cohort? How high have you gone?
In the T17,
Mhm.
17 groups, yeah.
And that's a 2.5 year training, right? Or now is it 3 years? 2.5, 3?
Yeah, about, in Europe it's 4 years because we do 2 modules a year, and in the States it's 2.5, 2 3/4, somewhere in there. I can add for myself, I met Ray in Europe. I trained with him in the late 90s, and I came to this country, to California, to work with him at Beba and the womb surrounds and so on. And so, my involvement was the most directly was, we co-directed the clinic. Wendy McCarthy was only involved with the first families. We are up to 300 families or so. So, I've been involved since we were about 50 families to now, facilitating many of the sessions and directing the clinic with him since 2012 and now on my own. And, what I can say is that what Ray was offering to families was so extraordinarily unique because he was so present for them, so present for everybody. It's a family clinic. He will include the baby. He will include every parent, every sibling. And he had an extraordinary skill to connect with babies. He had a very slow rhythm in himself, and he just made contact with this, cranial touch, with this very, very aware touch, and he will follow the baby's lead. But when they started the clinic, what they wanted was to learn from babies, which is a very unlike thing to do, because often people want to teach, parents how to be with babies, but he wanted to learn from babies. And so that developed all this awareness of, wow, but there is so much consciousness in the baby, and the baby is communicating and is showing their birth story, and how that happens in their emotions, and how there can be a communication between parents and facilitators and baby to tell the story, and for the baby to show it with their movement, with their sounds, with their positions and so on. So that was kind of a gift, one of the gifts that he had, and it was to connect with babies. But then he was so good at connecting with the baby in everybody at every age. So not just, little ones, but with all children of all ages, with adults of all ages. I think that's why we all love, so many of us love working with Ray, because he will listen deeply. He will see you deeply in the places where we were wounded, where we were hurt, where we needed to be seen, we needed to be loved. And he just naturally and very generously will connect with those places, and will help people, bring the little one to be seen and to stay in contact with the adult self. So I think that was a very, very big gift that he had. Yeah.
Thank you, Tara. And Mary, I know that you work very closely with him in midwifery, working with birth and also preparing families. So would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I took his training. It was the 8th training, and it was the early 2000s. And in that training, part of it was to do sessions around what happened in our own birth, so that we could really connect the dots to what our experience was as babies and being born. And I had already been a midwife for 25 years. I've been a midwife for 49 years now. And what it brought to me was this awareness of how fully developed the consciousness of babies it really is, and how aware and sensitive and conscious they are. Their bodies, they look immature, but their consciousness is like, it's full and knowing. And before that time, I really looked at birth as the mother's experience, that she had contractions, her cervix dilated, and she pushed the baby out. And after working in the training with sessions and with Ray, I really got how the baby was a full participant of that journey. They actually initiate labor to begin by releasing a hormone to the mother, and her body responds, and the contractions begin and keep going. And excuse me. And so that just started a whole different knowing in me of how to connect and relate to the babies. And I thought I was connecting with them before and saying, hi, baby, and, palpating the mother's abdomen. But with this training, I just realized that we can really have a conversation. And if something is stuck in labor, we can communicate with the baby. And the baby really wants to find the easiest path out. And just, energetically and verbally, it could help move the labor on, help it to progress. So that was a real gift for me, just in how I related to babies in a new way, as well as how my presence at birth changed from, being able to differentiate what complications happened in my own birth from what complication may show up in the birth that I'm sitting in. Mm-hmm. And just allowed me to be more settled and really trust birth, like in the center of my bones, just to know mothers know how to give birth and babies know how to get born, and they do it together. And that was revolutionary for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's really wonderful to listen to the three of you, because it feels like you all have addressed some of the major questions that we have about the development of the Castellino Foundation training, and the background coming from you, Sandra, of the polarity and the chiropractic, and how in that time, there weren't trainings. And then Franklin Sills came, and and how he got involved with William and the whole exploration of baby consciousness, and how, Tara, you really wonderfully narrated the creation of the Beba Clinic, and how he could really be with people, both adults, children, families, and babies, and Mary, your connection with birth, and how much better birth can go if you work at this level. And so I feel like we've addressed a lot of the questions that came, along in this series of questions for pioneers about PPN. But I will ask, like, what other important work and how did he do, and how did they grow together? I think you all have answered that, but I don't know if you want to add anything more, Tara.
I would like to add something. My observation of working with Rail over the 20 years plus is that apart from the work that he did, bringing awareness to the baby and the baby in each of us, he was very connected with what he called the blueprint. And the blueprint is this consciousness, the consciousness that is all the time there. And we'll go to work with imprints that happens in our life experiences, but he will always weave it to what is the awareness, the presence that is always there and we can always refer to. So that was a very wonderful way of working. He wasn't getting trapped in the trauma. He was catching the trauma, but really going to the resources of the blueprint. And the other thing that for me, I value very much of his contribution is his work with what he called double binds. Mm-hmm. So these are really complex dynamics, family dynamics, ancestral dynamics that people have, where we find ourselves in a situation where it doesn't feel that there is a win-win. So whatever we choose, it feels like there is a loss and somebody needs to lose. And those dynamics are very prevalent in group work. And we all have them in relationship to our ancestral life and our imprints of how we came into the world. So he was a master of working those dynamics and acknowledging, the different parts, everybody in the dynamic, in the group, in the family, and finding a way to walk slowly, slowly through those tension fields until we'll find a place of harmony and flow. So that for me is one of the things that has taught me the most and was so relevant in family work and in womb surrounds. Because in womb surrounds, we will always inevitably will find those moments where those dynamics will be present and everybody will be so uncomfortable, and other people will just don't know how to hold those places. But he was a master of that. He taught us, he said, you have to develop the muscle to sit in the double bind, in the tension field until you find a way out. So I wanted to add those pieces,
Yeah. And boy, have we had the chance to do that together in this work. That always comes up, and you really build the muscle for how to be with that. And, you know, I think Ray was always connected with Blueprint, and his spiritual path was a big part of his life. And when he worked with Anna Titty in that first Body into Being, I think that she really like strengthened the Blueprint knowing and teaching in our trainings, and really brought that more to life. So I just want to credit her on that part too. Yeah.
And Sandra, you've talked to me about Ray's spiritual life, and I know we've talked with you about your spiritual life, and it was same teacher, I think, right? So would you be willing to share a little bit about this spiritual life and the influence that it had on the work?
Well, let's see. Yes, as we were exploring polarity therapy, we were also getting exposed to this spiritual teacher, and they came into our lives at the same time. Dr. Stone, who started polarity therapy, followed the same teacher. Well, his teacher was the teacher of our teacher, because he was a different generation. Dr. Stone was in his 80s and we were in our 20s. But so it's a meditation path, and you can follow it and follow any religion. But there are 4 things we're asked to do. One is to meditate. One is to be vegetarian. And one is to have no drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, or tobacco. And one is to lead a life of integrity. So that's probably the hardest one. Well, meditation is hard, but you know, it's easy to be a vegetarian. It's easy to not drink or smoke or do drugs. It's, you know, every day, every decision, can we be kind? And so I think the practice, which we do 2.5 hours a day, the meditation practice, you know, even if we're totally sitting there watching our minds run amok, there's something that settles. And Ray knew how to settle. And I think the path that we follow helped with that. You know, it helped all of us to keep coming back. Not that we stay there. It's like a constant thing every minute. You know, where's your mind going into this other place that you had no intention of it? But it's a practice of bringing your attention back. And it does involve having a spiritual teacher, a specific spiritual teacher.
And he would go every year to India to be with that teacher. You both did, isn't that right?
Yes, right. And the teacher was older than we are, and he died. His name was Charan Singh. He died in 1990, and he left a successor. So we continued to go after that. So for a while, we were going every year. I've been going every year. Ray was a little less frequent toward the end, but one of the things that that gave him is he had no fear whatsoever of dying. He was actually, by the time he realized he was dying, he was looking forward. He would say to me, maybe tonight. He had no feeling that there was something that was scary about this thing that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So that is thanks to the spiritual path.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra.
Yeah. Along that line, of his passing, like he was teaching all the way on his way out, as well as, in his
Right.
life. What?
Yeah.
Always, yeah. And Tara and I both had the chance to sit with him daily, or, very frequently on his journey to birth out of his body. And he really did have no fear, and he was so eager to be held in the arms of his teacher and to become part of the light, and just excited to go there. And there was no fear or no like attachment that he had to stay or be at war with the cancer. It was like he was just in this place of total acceptance, and we all got to have major lessons on dying from being with him.
Yeah, yes. I remember we'll sit with him, and he will just connect these states that were almost ecstasy sometimes. And he would say, it's glorious, it's glorious. I mean, he just had these experiences of the light where he was going to, and he was just bringing that in the room. I mean, we had moments of so extraordinary presence that we all visited with him, and he was ready, and he was so, even he was in tremendous pain. I mean, his last months were hard, very hard, but he was so accepting. I mean, I remember he saying, we come the first beginning of life, and then we have all these years that that we get to enjoy life and be in life, and okay, there is this little window that is also hard to go. He was like, I will be bitching and screaming and complaining about pain, and I don't know. I just learned so much to see him so accepting of his condition and putting the focus in the light and not in the form, in the matter aspect.
Yeah. And I remember him saying one time when we were there, do you know why there is pain? And we said no. And he said, because when there's this much pain, the only place you can go is, to the master, to the light, to that place on the other side. And I'm being called to do that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I'm wondering if any of you could share, if you could just reflect and just see what are the most important messages that you think Ray would share with the younger generation?
I think just some thoughts that come, to slow down, to be present, to love, to listen. He was a connector. He loved communicating. And I think what he will share is not so much what he will tell them to do, is that's the way he was. And he inspired that in others. I mean, he'll sit with you and he'll have time, and he'll just listen to you and connect. And so, he will invite that in every family that we were together. He was just that presence, that slow presence that would invite connection. So I think he'll invite, healthy, organic life and meditation and, good practices, slowing down, connection, love. I think those kind of simple but very deep things he will. That's what comes to mind. What do you think, Mary and Sandra? Yeah.
Well, definitely the love piece. I mean, it was all about love, to love ourselves, to love each other, to pay attention to the energy field that was between us and whoever we're with, and the field that's always present and around us. that was always something he was referencing. I remember being at a conference and him standing beside me, and he's like reading the crowd, energetically, and watching the activations and the settling, and he was just really aware of the field. Yeah. Yeah. So I think to pay attention to what's there that we can't necessarily see with our eyes, but there's a sensation of it. Yeah. What about you, Sandra?
I mean, I just watching what he did in his life, besides in his work, family was important to him. And he played disc golf. And he would come up from Ojai, and he and Sean, and whenever they could get him, Finbar would go out and play disc golf. So it was really important to him to connect. And that was, a thing that they did as the guys in the family. I mean, it was really important to him his connection to Finbar, Sean's son.
So his grandson, yeah.
His grandson, yeah. Sean is his son, who I raised from age 7. So there is this clear line. But the thing he wanted to be in that kind of intimate connection. He craved it. He didn't thrive in like small talk or, he wanted to be in something that was meaningful. And so he was amazing at creating spaces that happened. That's what the womb surround was. That's what the Beba sessions were. That's what about connections with Mary, working with the couples, preparing for birth, and then after birth were. At one point in time, he said, I don't want to work for a while. I don't want to do any womb surrounds, whatever. He would find, I would not schedule anything for a couple months. And he would find somebody who he could work with outside of, business. It was something he thrived on. And it always came back to that energy that, the blueprint was something that came from polarity. And Anna did reinforce it in Ray. Yes, but it was always there. I mean, he studied with Peter. He did the first round with Peter Levine, SC, and he taught, what Peter had to say. He didn't go on to the more advanced things because he figured he could apply it, and he could, Anyway, he thrived on intimate contact.
So that would be his message to the younger generations is,
well, to pay attention to your relationships.
Yeah. Got it.
And the other thing that he did so strongly was whatever he became, in my mind, he was like another Dr. Stone who had pulled together so many different things. And he would try to be framing it in he had visions of a bigger administrative thing. And I always kept saying, if you just do what you're so good at doing, people will copy this. And people have copied this. There are people doing womb surrounds. There are people working with families. There are people doing trainings because it's an amazing gift to the world. And people are hungry for this. When people find out that I have anything to do with, working with early trauma, even though I'm not the therapist, it's like, I hear so many stories because people, we all need something like that. And the other thing is, the way people are is the way they've adapted to their story. You know, if they came in with a certain ancestral or birth or whatever trauma, everything we've done is a way to adapt.
Mm.
And so we're doing a good job of it right now, and we don't need fixing. It's just that if we explore that with enough slowness and attention, the charge can change. And that's the basis of the womb surround, and the basis of working with the families is to slow it down and give it attention. And in relationships, I mean, Ray was about relationships.
That's beautiful.
He was also really playful.
Yeah.
That's a part that I really liked about him too. Like he loved to sing and he loved to play. And in our trainings, like he would start the day off and just, just burst out in song and, divide our training group into 3 sections and do 3-part harmonies. And on the break, he'd take his flute to call people back in. And he was just always up for something fun, playful, anything with music. He was a music teacher also. I really love that part of him
Yeah.
too.
And
I
that was
remember-
I'm sorry.
Just one more thing. I remember being in Spain with Tara and him, and we went to the Gaudi Cathedral in Barcelona, and it was so inspiring that the structure of that building. And at one point, it was just getting close to closing, and people were leaving, and Ray just belted out an opera, and singing. And the acoustics were amazing, but he was just never shy about doing something like that. Yeah.
And people didn't know that was a very funny situation, because there was like a guard and he looked at us like, wait, is he singing here in the Sagrada Familia? You're not supposed to sing. And he would look at me like, are you going to do something? And I'm like, I'm not going to do anything. He's singing, this is beautiful. And the guy was like, yeah, it's true. It's so amazing. So, so Ray ended up just singing there. And yeah, it was, he had that gift. And another gift for me, he was a very, very creative person. I mean, he was always bringing new thoughts. Like he will develop, he would still be with us. The training will continue evolving, adding new elements. He was a constant creator. He was a pioneer, but he never settled for things. He had that creative fire in him that will just rebuild, recreate, and find, okay, what's the best way? What can people do to continue the work? He developed them sequencing workshops, and he had so many projects. He had several books that he was going to write. He didn't end up writing them because he didn't have the time to sit, because he was always creating, always bringing new things. And also because honestly, he did very well in partnership. So he was not a solo creator, that he wouldn't just sit there on his desk and just write a book like some people do. He will do that in connection, sit with somebody, talk about the work, and then it would just bring everything, and then that will be written. So, that was the part that he didn't get to complete. He wrote some really phenomenal articles, but there's some books in the making of, some people that were going to write with him, and we're hoping that will complete at some point, because he had a lot of things to share and to give.
Yeah. The work was never stagnant, always in a state of change and growth. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I compared him to Dr. Stone. When we studied with Dr. Stone, at one point we were in a workshop in Davis, and Dr. Stone discovered watermelon. Not that he didn't know about watermelon, but he was ecstatic about watermelon. We all went on watermelon fasts.
Yeah.
And Ray had the same thing. If he saw something that he thought he could use in his work or anywhere, he would just add it. And he integrated the music. with what he was doing with the classes. I didn't even know he did this thing in the classes. But, you know, he was a choir director. That was just, you know, Ray was dyslexic and he didn't do well in just sitting down and, you know, trying to do things by himself in a classroom. So we found all these other ways that he could do things with people. I mean, when he was in chiropractic school, he had study partners. You know, he learned best by doing, but he integrated everything. And not everybody does that. They find one thing maybe, and then they just keep going with that. But Ray that would have killed his soul. He loved finding the next thing that he could add.
Evolving. He was an evolver. He really was. I do credit him for making our pre and perinatal world so much safer and more accessible and more understandable. I bless him every time.
Yeah.
Um,
He was so brilliant in creating structures for the trainings, the workshops, the talks, the sessions, everything. Yeah.
And
well,
maybe
go ahead,
I
Sandra.
just want to mention the supervision.
Yeah.
Something that hasn't been mentioned. He was, it was important to him to mentor people really well. And so he developed a lot of different structures about that. And maybe Tara or Mary can say more about the supervision, but he was called into organizations to teach them about how he did supervision because it was such a different way of doing supervision.
Well, you know, what I can add is that his supervision structure was all about the practitioner. So it was not about the client. So if, you know, we're working with a client, we did, you know, hundreds and hundreds of sessions of supervision with the BEBA staff. With him, we'll meet every month and we'll bring the cases of the families that we're working with. And then he will supervise, and then we will do that later on together. And then he will do it with students, with graduates, you know, in different contexts. But the main idea is that it was not about the family. It was not about, okay, so what to do with this family? That was not his focus. It was, okay, so what's your intention? So always, what's your intention and what's your challenge? So what do you find in yourself that is challenging as you are trying to support this family? And so it will always turn into an inner inquiry journey of what am I activated with when I work with this family? Why do I find it challenging that the dad is doing that, or that the baby is doing this, or the mom is doing that? And that will turn into an inner exploration. And once we work through that in ourselves, then we always knew how to do the next step with the family that we were supporting. So his focus was inside out. It wasn't outside in. And that was for everything. You know, all sessions were an inner inquiry. Womb surrounds were about the client initiating, establishing their intention, and him following the lead of the client, not following his own lead. So he always followed from inside. That was one of his gifts.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tara. That's true. The inside out approach is really important. So I thank you for bringing that and for bringing the supervision, Sandra. Mary, do you want to add anything before I ask another question? I just have a few more questions.
No, you can move on.
So is there anything that you would change, or do you feel like Ray would say that he would change if he could go back? And if so, in which ways or why?
I think he will have been very happy to have some books written. I think he will have loved to have his work written, because that was kind of lingering for years to get that. He had so many ideas that other people sometimes were just using, and sometimes crediting him, sometimes even not sure how to credit him because he hadn't put it in words. So I would say that he was very focused. Like the last years, the work was going to blossom even more. And he was going into bigger audiences, and he was going to write the work, and he had like in 2 years. I mean, we talk a lot about how things were growing and developing. And I think the only thing for me is that if he would have stayed a little longer, I think he would have completed some of the things that he had started. So that's what comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tara. Sandra or Mary, if he could go back, what would he say he would have changed and why?
I could say something. I think sometimes in the beginning when I was working with him, he would sometimes give himself a really hard time if he made a mistake or did something that was upsetting. And I think, and then toward the end of his life, it got much lighter and there was so much more acceptance for himself.
It's true.
I think he might have would have moved that full acceptance earlier on in his years of living.
Thanks, Mary. It's true. I really watched him transform over 20 years
Yeah.
to someone who's much more lighter in his heart and more, just more generous to himself and to others. I mean, even though he was a really generous person.
To not take, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's right. You go.
And to just teach us not to take things so seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Sandra?
I want to say maybe he would have liked to have, known what he knows as a mature adult when he was a young father and husband. But I think we all have that,
I think we all have that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think Tara's so right. I mean, he had a big vision of the work spreading, and it was frustrating for him because he was dyslexic and he really couldn't write, just sit by himself and write. He could write and he would touch your heart with anything he wrote.
It's true.
But to him, it was a major accomplishment to write 4 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how you write a book. He was not somebody to go and closet himself and write. Mm-hmm. He needed interaction. So, that job is left to us. And spreading the work, he wanted to do everything he could to make it available to as many people as possible. And he certainly evolved in his ability to hold presence. Mm-hmm. I mean, somebody said to me, when he first started doing womb surrounds, supporting him was a whole different thing because he would be so emotionally devastated himself with this devastation of the story that he was helping process.
Yeah.
And later it was not so much like that.
So true. Yeah. That really changed over the years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else any of you would like to add that you feel like we haven't talked about with Ray? Any final thing? For my part, I would add that Ray was brilliant at creating structures. Like I know you had said, Sandra, the supervision and all the training pieces, and Tara, I'm so glad you brought the double binds and all the other parts, but he created a form that really was helpful. And he created principles that were easy to learn and very deep and have really made a huge difference, not only in the pre-perinatal work, but just in general when people are working to even go through the principles and list them, created safety. So I think that he was really a wonder at being able to pull things and create structure in which people could learn and also be able to apply what he was teaching.
Yeah,
Yes.
I so agree with that. And maybe one thought that came as you're saying that is, you know, he was working with individuals, but then he realized that it was so much easier to hold the process in smaller groups. Like working, he said he won't last too long, you know, with all the work that is done one-to-one. At some point it felt like there was too many layers that just one person couldn't hold. And so he created the structures of the womb surround so that different people will hold those layers for the 10 person. So he created all those structures out of his own need. I mean, that's the interesting thing, that they grew out of the work itself. Like the principles, they were not 8 principles at the beginning. You know, they just grew and out of working with families, then started to experiment, for example, the brief and frequent eye contact, and seeing the results that will make when there is more connection, there is more flow, there is more inclusiveness, and what that will do to children, what that will do with couples, and then that will become a principle. So, but everything came from the experience out into, okay, this is good, this is good. We want to have, you know, choice. We want to have self-care. All those principles grew out of the work itself, not just out of his head. So maybe I just to reiterate that he was a pioneer, he was a creator, but he was creating from inside out.
Yes.
Fractures were not just left brain. He had a huge right brain, an intuitive brain. He also had a very good left brain, but everything was coming from a felt sense and experience. And then it will bring it into a structure that will be holding safety and containment for the work.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, I would say, you know, whenever I asked him to make a decision, which I was constantly asking me as the administrator, this decision had to wait until it settled in his body, always. And to expand on what Tara said, everything he did was in groups. The family was a group, the womb surrounds were a group. When he did the training, he was teaching people to work in groups. And supervision was in groups. I mean, he did do some individual work, but he found, you know, as Tara said, it was much more powerful. And it was also easier to you know, not have all that, whatever projection might happen, you know, it could be diluted. The other thing he did is he videotaped everything.
Yeah, he liked those mechanics, the recording equipment and the microphones.
Yeah, the toys. He loved the toys.
Yes, he was good at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was an amazing photographer too. For a while, he was taking photos during the womb surround and then doing a slideshow at the very end on the last day. It was an amazing gift to people because he was capturing them in these very special moments.
Right.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Miri, would you like to any final words of anything you'd like to add, and then we'll complete?
Yeah, you know, just thinking about who were the main influencers, I just want to underline that the babies, the newborn babies, children of all ages, the families, you know, were the major influencers to help him discover what supported the family to work together in harmony, and what supported them to settle. And he really learned from the families. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining me with this part of the interview.